get started with the preliminary logistics in terms of sign-in sheets and introductions. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Judy Talbot. You can probably see my name attached to email. Thanks for everyone joining us this evening. I'm going to quickly go through the agenda and then we'll go around the room for introductions. Key element of tonight's meeting is to review and discuss the Groundwater Revised Feasibility Study, and Joe Gowers from EPA will be leading that section. Also a preview for the work ahead for cleanup activities. And at the end, we're going to be discussing revisions to the EPA website and when that will roll out. We'll begin with approval of the meeting minutes for March 14th. Those notes are at the place settings for the CAG members. We're going to move into updates, beginning with the consent decree, response to letters that the CAG sent out regarding OCDA land use, NERDA, and then we'll go into the main event on the groundwater feasibility study, transition into upcoming activities online, and conclude with the website organization and user-friendly information. Anything that anybody wants to add on the agenda before we start introductions? Then let's go around the room and we'll start here with the CAG members.
Okay, my name is Gretchen Samarka. Member of the CAG, Ringwood resident.
Thank you to all, Ringwood resident, former mayor.
Shannon Lisa, Program Director, Edison Wetlands Association.
Robert Spiegel, Executive Director, Edison Wetlands Association. Good chapter 5.
And well, let's start here.
Ken Petrone, New Jersey DEP, section chief.
Our first community relations, New Jersey DEP.
Edna Lynch, church member and Upper Green Lake resident.
Wanda Monahan, Environmental Council. Colleen Liddell, Ford.
Second. Say that again.
I'm Ford. I'm the project manager.
Thank you.
Rick Cosman, tonight. Garen DePippo, Cornerstone.
John Spear, Borough Ringwood Council.
Joe Gowers, EPA Project Manager.
Matt Sebi, EPA Community Involvement.
Sana Taylor, for Health.
Carolyn, President.
Mitch Kahn, I'm chair of the Ringwood Economic Development Commission, and I'm on the board of directors of Greater Bergen Community Action, which is the parent company, parent organization of Cap Solar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for being here. With that, let's start with some basic housekeeping. Any changes that need to be made to the March meeting minutes? They were pretty, I think, straightforward. Any items for discussion?
No.
Approved? Approved. All right. Updates. So moving into the update, you've seen a couple of different emails going out. A lot has happened this week. Joe or Pat, who would like to focus on the consent decree? And if you could, our videographer got outstanding tickets to the Yankees game tonight, so if you could come forward, that way, like over by the end of the table, I think we'll be able to capture it.
Okay, as far as the operable Unit 2 consent decree, which provides for the performance of the operable Unit 2 remedial action, the cleanup action for the Keepers Mine Pit, Canamine Pit, and O'Connor disposal area, that consent decree has just actually been lodged with the federal court. That lodging occurred on May 6th. The listing of that in the Federal Register actually occurred today, which essentially starts the 60-day public comment period on that judicial consent decree, which would make the last date that comments would be accepted July 8th. Now, at the same time, the state has also listed in their register this consent decree, and your public comment period
It's
is
60 days also.
60 days also, so a couple days before, you know, a few
From
days
Monday.
before.
Can an extension be requested? This is a very complex site, a lot of things that need to be included.
Yeah, since that's handled by the Department of Justice, we would have to ask the DOJ whether that would be, or whether that could be granted. So we can bring some more information back, but right now, in writing in the register is a 60-day public comment period.
Can either, if the CAG doesn't want to do it, as formally requested in writing, both the state and federal government, how long does it take before they would respond to the request in writing, whether or not, because
This is a request for an extension at this point in time.
60 days, it's going to take more than 60 days to adequately prepare comments for this and submit them based on the size of the administrative record and the number of exhibits that are going to be at least as wetlands comments for this decree.
So, yeah, again, like I said, it's a 60-day public comment period. You can put a request in writing. I'm not sure what the Department of Justice process is in terms of granting extensions for public comment period. So I will look at that for you.
Okay, what about the state?
Yeah, it's done by our attorneys, so I have to talk to our attorneys at the Attorney General's office to see how that works. But same thing, we'll let you know.
And can I pose that to the CAG to discuss before the end of the meeting, to ask both as a CAG, because as the wetlands, I'll make the request if the CAG doesn't, but you know, I'm going to be giving a significant amount of documents to the CAG that the CAG may or may not have seen that were part of the administrative record, and talking about years, probably at least 7 years worth of documents, data, materials that would be helpful to people, both the CAG and the public, to be able to look at as part of their preparation, if they individually or as collectively as a CAG want to submit comments.
Yeah, we'll certainly get back to you on that. We will ask a question in terms of how an extension will be requested, the whole process there. One thing we did provide today was a handout on the back table, which basically lays out when you submit comments, how you would submit comments either to the federal government or to the state of New Jersey.
And do you want to maybe reference that handout?
Yes.
Does everyone have, does everyone have this public comment on consent decree?
I'll take it off.
So what happened, we'll just do a little refresh, is that this was filed on Monday?
It's actually lodged with the court on Monday.
It was lodged on Monday. We received the press release from the Public Affairs Office, and it went out in email to the larger email distribution list, I would say Monday afternoon about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And it was so new that the consent decree had not yet been posted on the Department of Justice page. They didn't have the comment period, so what we'll do is make sure that this gets circulated to the wider distribution list. It provides instructions on where and how to submit comments on the consent decree.
Is it going to be listed in the Federal Register as well?
It actually is listed as of today in the federal, as of today, which is what triggered the 60-day public comment period.
And could you go over just the, so I know that it says significant amount of information, but basically summarizing for the CAG so that we understand what that is?
Sure, but what the judicial consent decree is, it's basically an enforcement document, an agreement between the potentially responsible parties and the federal government and the state of New Jersey for performance of the remedy for the Peters Mine Pit, Canna Mine Pit, and O'Connor disposal areas that was selected in the 2014 record of decision and then amended for the contingency remedy in the 2015 explanation of significant differences. So that's basically the capping, the excavation around the collar, the Peters Mine Pit area, and capping the Peters Mine Pit area, capping, consolidation and capping of the O'Connor disposal area, and similarly scraping and capping of the Canna Mine Pit area.
And so it's people signing on, accepting responsibility that becomes an enforceable document if they fail to carry through on those responsibilities at that point.
That's correct. In addition to providing for the remedy, it also provides for EPA's recovery and the state of New Jersey's recovery of past response costs associated with the site.
With regards to that, I brought a copy of the ESD to pass around. The CAG members to have a copy. And I have a question just regarding this in relation to the because I've been out, I'm sorry, I got had surgery. I've been away since last year, but we've been studying the record and when it was filed. The issue of the ESD. Something that we had.
For people, can you just explain what that acronym stands for?
Well, I gave a copy.
Right, no, for
the
people.
Explanation of significant differences, which is a document. It's a tool that the U.S. EPA uses as a regulatory tool when they have a procedural. What is it?
And so, Bob, that related to the contingency remedy, right? It's tied to contingency remedy.
Right.
And
but there's also the actual legal use of this is when the remedy changes.
After the rod.
After the rod.
Yeah.
Correct.
An explanation of significant differences is if there's like a minor, what could consider a relatively minor change to some aspect of the remedy. A larger change, though, we would have to issue what's known as a rod amendment.
And
Right.
how did, just to interject here real quick, how did EPA determine that the OCDA CAG and recycling center would be significant and not a fundamental?
I'm gonna pause here because we're getting into some very technical issues that deal with the rod. And what I would like to do is hold that and ask their questions about the consent decree. And you have your bidding. Go ahead.
Yes, I do have a question, because I see that you have 60 days, right, after the publication?
In the Federal Register.
All right, but it's not dated, all right, after the publication.
Yeah, that's why we're telling you, because honestly, I prepared that.
It was
All right,
hot off the
Just listed
presses.
this morning,
All right,
that was actually prepared yesterday. So.
5/9 then, you know.
Quite honestly, the ESD is actually extremely relevant in the context of what we're talking about because of the fact that
We're gonna come back to it. We're not putting it away. I just want to get the questions of clarification out before we drill down.
okay.
So 60 days from today, putting it in
July 8th, yes.
And we will send an update. Like we said, this was hot off the presses, didn't have a lot of the key information, and also didn't want people hearing about it through the press or social media. We're working to try and keep information out in a timely manner, so
So these comments are in reference to the decision that was just made?
the consent decree.
There are comments that you would make on the consent decree. When those are submitted, the federal government would be required to respond to those comments. So those comments would be evaluated and there would be some sort of response generated with regards to those comments. And then based upon those comments, the federal government needs to make the determination whether to recommend entry of the consent decree to the court. And once the consent decree is entered, it's basically a finalized essentially document, essentially a finalized document.
And
A finalized agreement.
as an example, if this consent decree was an agreement about work that was going to be done, and somebody said, hey, they're getting ready to file bankruptcy next week, that would be a big that would be
Yeah,
really
it's
important.
basically generally issues related to the
Yeah.
legality of that document.
Right, the
We've
arrangement.
heard
And,
that, but we've heard that scare before about Ford, what if they declare bankruptcy?
no,
That was the
that-
whole
wait.
premise to.
I was just saying that it was a generic, it is not in this case. The agreement is about people signing on to do work, and if people knew that there was something that would affect the ability of those entities to perform that work, that would be very important to make a comment and say there's serious reservations. That's an example of one thing that would happen. We're going to now ask that to provide an explanation of how the ESD ties to the consent decree, and then we'll go back into the.
The money.
I don't think Vivian's done.
Vivian's didn't finish, sorry.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
yeah, where is the consent? Where is it? Consent.
The consent decree, there's actually, I believe there's an address, right, if you look, there's an email address where you can,
But where's the?
and there's also, we can get through, there's also a way to request the document in writing.
Yes,
also, a written document,
So,
and we can get you some of that information
All right.
also.
We will print it off and mail it to you.
okay.
I mean, it is actually within the Federal Register listing.
Right,
I
that's not helpful.
understand, yes.
So we will provide a link electronically for people where to access the consent decree. The consent decree itself is about 30 pages, but then there's extra.
All the appendices, including the record of decisions.
So about how long? Give us
But as
a,
far as the link is actually in that
Right.
listing, but it's the written.
but it's about 30 pages, and all told with the appendices, it was 100 something?
Oh,
It's
I
a
want mine
large,
in less than
because
3
of
pages.
because the rod itself was very large, so.
Right, yeah. So it references the rocks.
Let me ask you a
Go
question.
ahead,
You
yes.
make a comment about the fact that you think it would be environmentally really bad thing, idea, that wouldn't,
Well, we
that comment wouldn't be worthwhile sending?
I mean, I can't tell you whether it would be worthwhile. I will tell you that we would have to respond to the comments that you do provide. So if you have a concern, provide that comment, there would be some sort of response generated.
But it wouldn't do any good.
Yes, it would.
I can't make that determination.
If the comments were related to the legality or the implementation of the actual remedy, whether or not it was legally, put forth what was in the consent decree, if somebody or entities put forth documentation to show that the consent decree was not based on something that could be entered into the record because of flaws in the actual decree, NEPA would have to respond to that and make sure that the decree adhered to the EPA Superfund regulations.
In other words, if it was environmentally a bad idea, but it was actually impacting people who were living nearby and would continue to impact them if their toxic sludge remained in place, then that would have a case.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and if enough people, or even if one person puts forth a complaint or a document that outlined, the flaws in the decree, EPA would have to respond to that. And if they were substantial, EPA would have to modify the decree to address the, flaws in the actual decree and the attachments that they're based on. It's just like any legal argument, if it's based on something that's not sound, and you review it and point out that things that are in the decree do not make sense or are not legal, EPA has to go back and make sure that it complies with the federal and state laws that it's based on. Is that a fair assumption or fair?
Yeah, exactly. So it's more dealing with the legality, legal issues and regarding on that consent decree. What's that?
Yeah, no, I understand.
Becca, did you want?
I think the blame for that is basically whether there's a legal problem with the consent decree.
Something.
It's not like, oh, we feel that it's just a terrible idea, it's impacting the
I
people that
mean,
live
if you
there.
provide those comments, we would have to respond
I mean,
to them, but
Yeah, well,
I
everyone
honestly can't tell you how that would
commented
impact.
already.
Well, but there are actually other things that, I'd like, one thing at least I would like to discuss with regards to the decree that has to do with the ESD that EPA used to, change the remedy from removing the waste in O'Connor to now leaving the waste and capping it. And, when you look at the ESD, right, it's a legal document, and EPA issues these on other sites, and I'll give you another example. With the Woodbrook Road Superfund site, the revenue for that site changed from $30 million to a little over $50 million, and because EPA underestimated the amount of volume of waste that was going to be removed. I know because it's across the street from where I live. I found this site. So EPA issued an ESD for that, which was appropriate because they changed the amount of money that was going to be needed, so they needed to go back and amend the ROD and issue the ESD.
And they
So
consider
that,
that a significant change.
but I question the fact that putting the ESD as a mechanism for the recycling center is not a significant change. It's a fundamental change. And it should be a ROD amendment, not an ESD, because if they were going to increase the cost of the remedy or do something that's significant, that's one thing.
Expand the scope of the
Yeah,
remedy, but not necessarily changing the remedy.
But fundamentally
entirely.
changing it, which is what they did, is not an ESD. That should be an actual ROD amendment, and that should go through the process of a ROD amendment.
And so here, you can see how detailed this is.
It's not detailed, it's very simple.
It's
a very simple.
this is an example of the type of legality that would be raised and the issues discussed. What I would like to do is,
Is that right? Look, can Joe talk to that for 1 minute?
Very, very quickly, you have to remember that the contingency remedy was already provided for in the additional record of decision. You probably would be right if we were just changing the remedy, but the contingency remedy was already laid out in the original record of decision. They just had to meet certain requirements in order for that to become the selected remedy. So, and that's why the choice was made to utilize an ESD, and that, of course, was run by our attorney.
But they didn't meet those requirements as laid out in the ESD. They didn't
Okay.
meet the timelines, they didn't meet the deliverables.
we're going to hold this right here. Rich?
I got a question. When was the record of decision?
Record of decision was June 30th, 2014.
Okay.
So 5 years ago.
Yes.
And
And the contingency, or the ESD was?
Was April 15th, 2015.
And what we can do
So a couple of
is,
years.
if we cannot, if there needs to be dedicated time with the consent decree just coming out, people haven't even had a chance to look at it. What we'll talk about at the end of today is the schedule moving forward, because it could be that the June CAG meeting could be dedicated totally to a working session on the consent decree, which would be allocated strictly to raising questions, talking things out. I know Bob is way ahead of the curve on this, and I think that other people would need a chance to look at it, try and get their heads around it, and then come prepared to ask questions. We can pre-work some of it with email.
Who are these attorneys?
Oh, that's the next part. Hold that thought for 30 seconds. All right,
So I have another question.
yes.
When was the consent decree signed by Ford, EPA, and town?
Well, again, it was just lodged with the court.
Yeah, but it was
May
signed,
6th.
it was already signed months.
Yeah, about within the last couple of months, yeah.
Okay.
So we can
So
start,
you don't know when?
we can look at the dates, yeah.
So between the record of decision and the signature, what basically took place? For those couple of years?
All those years?
Oh, wait.
Basically negotiations.
Yeah,
But nothing changed with the plan, right?
Nothing changed with the plan, but basically we had an extended negotiation. There were a lot of parties that were involved with this consent decree. Not just EPA, the state of New Jersey signed on to the consent decree. We each had our own issues that needed to be addressed with regards to cost recovery and the remedy.
And what was that trenching done?
There was the last trenching was done in O'Connor in 2010. That was the one where they basically trenched it across the entire O'Connor disposal area, and then there were some smaller trenches installed, say, 2006, 2007 time.
And Bob, that was a lot of the work that Bob Chapin did, right?
Rich
Rich Chapin, sorry.
Well, Rich Chapin and Peter Defer, Dr. Peter Defer, and Lou, I think Lou Fry Engineering were all three technical people. I know that was one of the documents actually that was reviewed, and we'll talk about making that available too for anybody that wants to review those documents, and also the technical documents that went along with that.
But that was part of the investigation that Rich Chapin and the CAG informed and significantly expanded from what was originally proposed.
Well, the trenching itself was
Well,
something
we're not
that was an investigation that was done as part of the O'Connor disposal area investigation. That was one of the things that I think Ford came back with and EPA approved. And then I believe they also removed some of the sludge at that time during the investigation.
Yeah, it's about, it was 2,000 cubic yards or something.
All right, so what I have regarding the remedial design report consent decree, dates of when the document was first signed for the CD, to send the document, we'll make hard copies available if anyone cannot download it electronically. There was a request for a timeline to help understand background in terms of how the consent decree was developed from when the contingency remedy was approved. And I will note all those action items in just a minute, because we just had a question from Vivian, and this is regarding the response letters regarding OCDA land use.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
about the consent decree?
Yes.
There's nothing different in the consent decree from the ROD or the ESD. The consent decree is just a legal document that goes into a lot of detail on how the ESD or the remedy is to be implemented. And it talks about a lot of legal things in it about who has to notify who's responsible for doing this, how the remedy will be implemented in a stepwise fashion. If something goes wrong, who gets notified, how do they get notified, who has to put money in up front, who has to...
So it's logistical, more...
It's all about how to implement what's already been described.
Yeah, there's no new remedy.
There's nothing new in
It's
there.
implementing the same remedy, it's just as Ken is indicating in other
Right, so
positions.
since April 2015, there's nothing changed in terms of
Right.
what's going to take place.
No, not at all.
Right, it just goes into a lot of detail about when Joe has to be notified of something, when I have to be notified of something, when Ford has to do something, when the borough has to do something. It just sets out in minute detail everybody's responsibilities in implementing the remedy that was selected way back with the ESD.
4 years ago.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, there's nothing really new in there other than who has to do what and when and how.
Right. But more seen today is like a surprise.
It's consent
That's-
decree.
We don't know that because...
And we haven't had a chance to look at it, so it just came out.
Because there are, they do put things in sometimes that,
Yeah, as far as the remedy, you're not going to see any surprises with the remedy, but there are other provisions in there, as Ken was indicating, provisions for financial assurance, for, paying, our response costs, for access. There's all
In
these
terms of
provisions.
physically what's going to occur,
Exact same thing.
there's no difference than what's in this paper
That's
4
right.
years ago.
The rod,
No
doesn't
surprise.
verify that.
Okay,
Judy,
yes.
the difference being the consent decree locks it in legally.
It's basically, if you want to, it's a contract. It's a contract.
So before the consent decree, as myself personally, maybe other members of the CAG or other groups, Edison Wetlands or
Sierra Club. I
Sierra
talked
Club,
today.
or
Talked to Jeff
they
Taylor
were
today.
hopeful that there wouldn't be capping of all the hazardous material. So the
Well, it's
consent
not
decree,
hopeful. They shouldn't be
Oh, I know, I agree with
It's
you.
not, we're talking about
Wait,
what's
so go ahead.
legal and what's in the actual documents.
Yeah, but the consent decree is,
Their interpretation of all the negotiations that took place.
I know, but it locks it in.
Yep,
So it's
That's it.
illegal then to make any changes.
yep, there will be no changes after this consent.
So that's why it's important.
Sorry, but, or you said it would be no changes, but could this be something that will evidently go to court?
This is something that if we
I don't know, if we can
want,
find
if we
something
want to
legally
challenge
wrong
any
with it.
aspect of the consent decree, either individually or as a group, that if you have an issue with the remedy, now is the time, this is the last time you will have a significant ability to influence the remedy.
Now is the time.
Because once they sign all this and lock it all in, it will be next to impossible until the remedy is actually completed. And then, only then, can you then challenge the remedy once it's complete.
Because,
Right? Is that
but how can you say now is?
Okay, wait,
Right
Rich,
now is the
we're taking a
hold
cue.
up once this is finished and the timeline goes by for,
Timeline 4 years went by.
I'm talking about.
Rich, hold on,
consent
just a
decree.
second.
I'm just saying, not now would be 4 years ago.
Okay, wait,
Well, 4 years
Hold
ago,
it.
I use that phrase all the time, now is the time.
Rich, hold on one second. We're gonna take a question from Vivian, because I got an example to provide, but I don't wanna give it without hearing the last part of this.
Well, right, this part, and then I'm gonna respond to him, but with court situation, if we could take it to court, I for one am willing to sit in front of the judge and tell my stories, you know what I'm saying? Along with Ford and the town, instead of them was just having meetings, you know, not having us, you know, be included in a lot of meetings.
Since that's never happened.
Right, since it's never happened, right, I'm willing to go to court, you know, and sit and talk, and you know, and,
Is there a board similar to the Remedy Review Board that handles the consent decrees that can be either petitioned or in addition to the supplemental materials that are submitted to for the actual decree? Is there an actual board similar to the Remedy Review Board?
And not that I'm aware of. I mean, basically, your opportunity is to basically submit comments on the consent decree and try to make your case with those comments that there's some issue with the consent decree.
Who does it go to, both at state and federal level? Who is the ultimate signature that says, okay, this is done, everything here is legal, and we have reviewed everything, and...
That would be, ultimately, the Department of Justice would be the one who would go to the court and basically say, you know, we've reviewed everything looks good, we recommend proceeding with entry.
Who would it be, DOJ?
I would have to see who exactly would be the one who referenced that, who was handling it, I don't know if she would be the one who actually.
So this is another action item to follow up on.
Yeah, we can find the person at the DOJ.
And to add on to that, Judy, what goes into, whoever is reading it on the DOJ, do we know the kind of, like, qualifications they're looking at to determine that the consent decree is on the up and up and is a
Again,
just document?
My understanding, I mean, typically I've been through the consent decree process a couple of times and really never had comments on the consent decree. Again, they're looking for something wrong with the consent decree, something legally not right with the consent decree, some problem with the consent decree. Things along the lines of, well, you know, we would prefer this remedy over that remedy. I don't think that's going to hold much influence.
Like, you know, the ESD is wrong, and it should be...
there's a lot of things that are wrong, I'm looking
What I'm
at
saying
things
is,
that are wrong.
if there's something technically wrong with what is being,
Technically.
what is...
Not human.
And that's what
Technically.
they don't care about. People, they care about whether it complies with
The
their
regulations.
little bureaucratic box, and if it doesn't, then...
I get it, I've been there.
I came up here...
Bob and Joe, here's a question.
Not years.
Is it basically like an issue of contractual law? Is that what the...
That's part of it.
So contractual law
It
is
is
a part
based
of the...
on regulations.
Yes.
All, and the super fund, right, is just like any other bureaucracy, and EPA has certain things that have to be included as part of the consent decree. Certain things from the state have to be included, but with this
Yeah,
site,
but you're arguing the remedy.
I'm not arguing.
You're arguing two different things.
No, hold it.
I'm discussing right now a question of what is the consent decree? What is it, and, you know, how, what does it advise
It's a
us?
separate issue from the remedy.
Well,
You're
there's
arguing
there's
remedy.
two, and here's why
I'm
You
arguing-
can't argue remedy on a consent.
Gentlemen, here's why I separated those issues.
It's not about arguing.
What I first, what I
Because you
first,
say it,
if I, don't make me come over there.
Boys.
Boys.
Doesn't make it
No.
true. I was heard 5 minutes ago. It's two different things.
I have a right to talk and,
So-
say, okay, so.
What is happening here is that there are two things, two different paths that are related and different. One is the questions of clarification that I think, no, just a
I'm just
second.
trying to understand.
I'm-
I think
Bear with me.
I have a clear
Bear
understanding, but
with me.
we'll just
So
say-
there's questions of clarification that we started to tease out, which are who reviews it at DOJ? What are the criteria that get evaluated? It's the legal basis.
Did I say anything wrong?
No.
Did I say anything here that was
Inaccurate.
conflate the remedy with
No.
the consent.
Time.
decree.
Bear with me.
Again, the issue, and
I'm trying.
as far as what I'm aware of, they're looking, it's basically, it's a legally binding contract, they're looking
Yes.
for legal issues,
And,
legal problems with that document, that's what they're looking for.
And-
With the logistics.
It's not gonna be, my
agreed upon.
understanding is that issues like,
And-
we prefer this remedy over
Yes.
that remedy, it's
No.
not going to.
hold it, I'm gonna just
And
time out here.
And I'm not.
Hold on. What the question is that there's a question that I think Bob Spiegel posed, or a comment, and see if I got this correct, that if there was something fundamentally flawed that is the basis for the consent decree, now is the time to raise it, because that would be a question of interpretation on the legal basis for the consent decree. Is that close?
That's pretty correct.
Okay, and that's why you are also right. It is not a chance to go back and revisit and say, we don't like this, we don't like that. And at the same time, if there's a legally flawed concern with the remedy, that is where it becomes relevant.
And it doesn't mean that the whole remedy is thrown out.
Right.
It could be that certain aspects that are, real, and exist within the document can get addressed without it being completely.
That it's severable, that you can address the part that is flawed and move
And
on.
still go forward with the remedy.
Correct. So it's not that you can say, well, I don't like the remedy, but if there's a fundamentally flawed basis or part of it that needs to go back and revisit it, somebody could make that point and the review board would have to say, good point, or actually it's been addressed. So this is the opportunity to do that. And the sequencing of this is that it builds, and as you get further along each path, more and, gets set in stone. And at this point, once everything is signed off here, it's pretty much good to go. Unforeseen acts of God is not included. And so if there are any concerns, this is the last opportunity. Now is the time, because this is really the last chance to say there's a flaw in the design before it moves forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's looking at time
Raise
to raise your.
Can I respond to this?
Yes,
I have one more question,
yes.
actually two. What was the, obviously, this is not your only superfund site you ever worked on. So what typically, or is there a typical time period from the ROD to consent?
Is there a typical time period?
Yeah.
It's typically shorter than what it took.
This is the only site.
I can tell you that. I've never gone through a negotiation which has lasted 3.5 years, over 3.5.
I wonder why.
What normally, like, about
This
a
site's not
year?
long.
About a
Yes.
year and a
It's
half.
hard to compare apples to
Yeah, I mean,
oranges.
it varies based upon site. The site, again, we explained why it's more complex here. You have more parties involved with their own issues.
Richard said.
It was another time issue, but I can't remember.
We'll come back. So
Yeah.
Vivian and then Linda.
All right, you're asking why we basically still got, in time, the way you say it, with all these issues, right?
No, I'm just trying to clarify what we're talking about.
Like, let's see, our meeting on 10/23/18 is when we found out that the town had plans started for a recycling center in 2012. So, this is why this is all new, because they did that back then. But we're not aware of half the things that go on. So do you understand what I'm saying? That's why it might seem like it's been, well, why are we discussing this now from 2012? Because we're finding out 6 years later, or whatever, that's how we find out things. So that they become on the topic, on the topic list for us. Things that we weren't included in as usual.
One is that this is an exceptionally long and complex process, and information has not been consistent. We're working on that. That is one of the things that have come forward in the last couple of months, is to make sure everybody's in the same terms, same information, that it's easy to get. It is a very convoluted process.
Also, I've been out and I have had a technical advisor come in that reviews a number of independent reviews of all the documents, and the community should have the right to look at all the documents and use them in their
Evaluation
preparation
for the consent
of
decree.
the consent decree, because they were done for that reason, to give people information from an independent source. So I think that's important, and that's why I, and I'll make those documents available, copies both in the township and electronically. So that anybody that's interested in reviewing Rich Chapin's documents, and the other documents from those independent experts in the preparation of their comments, so that they can see what somebody said about aspects of the plans that were done. I think that's critically important, because that's not me saying it, those independent experts.
Maybe we can post it on your website to see it's still active.
We're
So let's
relaunching
update
on the
it.
website.
That'll be,
So
so
it's been a week to 2 weeks.
we will make it available and flag that. So thank you. Yes.
I was wondering if Joe, you could explain why the Ramapo are not stakeholders and why they were left
Well, the
out.
Ramapo are stakeholders, they're treated just like all other stakeholders.
Well, they weren't really important, they weren't involved in the decision making. So,
They're not
They have-
decision makers, they're stakeholders.
right,
Yes. And the decision-making
So,
authority is
is
the
that legal? People, the people
As
that
far
are
as
affected,
stakeholders,
Yeah.
well, no,
They weren't at the table.
right.
But, and I
No,
think an important, I'm sorry, Joe, I think a very important piece of this site that makes it unique to other sites, why the Upper Ringwood community may be considered more than a little bit of stakeholders, because this Superfund site encompasses their entire residential living area. It's not like it's necessarily where I am in Cupsall, like I'm a stakeholder, but the Upper Ringwood community lives there.
They're
They
residents.
The
They
residents
live
live
on the
And
supermarket.
that's true
On
for
the
many
site.
Superfund sites. I mean,
So if the Ramapo were federally recognized, would they have been at the
Yes, they
table?
would have.
And at the table, but they
would
don't
have had
have
a
decision
say.
they would be decision makers, but they would have certain additional rights if they were a federally recognized tribe. One of the issues that was brought up early was actually going to the remedy review board. If they were federally recognized, my understanding is they would have been allowed to sit there at the remedy review board.
So it doesn't hold any sway with the state of New Jersey
It
that
doesn't
they
make
are
us
state
no more
recognized
human. That's
Not for the consent decree? No.
for the remedy, for the capping, for the, I mean, we're past that now,
Right.
they were just locked out.
It's a matter, so I will say that it involves federal Indian law and federally recognized tribes, and this is ongoing, and a number of tribes that are not federally recognized continue to pursue that. In the past year, Virginia now has 6 federally recognized tribes instead of 1. So there is a process, there is a lot, there's 250 years of why this is, and
Yeah, I know.
Federal Indian policy is one of the least consistent doctrines, but once you are a federally recognized tribe, there are requirements for federal consultation, and there are different triggers. And unfortunately, at this time, if you are not a federally recognized
We're
tribe.
working on it.
Right, but I mean, the state agencies are actually not allowed to. Their input is the trigger of a federally recognized tribe. Even if an entity wanted to, the requirement is federal recognition for that.
So let's say they're recognized tomorrow, or in 60 days, or after 60 days. Would there be any going back?
Not that I'm aware of, I would
Yeah,
have
you really
to,
don't. It's
yeah, I don't know,
hypothetical.
honestly.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? After everything's capped and it's done, what recourse does the town have if things get screwed up, if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing? For instance, it says they're supposed to be sampling water on an ongoing basis. I don't know what ongoing means. Does it mean every week, every month, every year?
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm just saying, what recourse does the town have if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing? And
No.
if things go wrong, and if we get dioxin into the reservoir and, you know, I mean, do we have guarantees is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's part of what the consent decree is. It's basically there are legal requirements there and penalties and so
But how would
forth.
we know if they're doing their jobs? I mean, I live in Ringwood, right? Who's gonna tell me that they sampled the water when they're supposed to be sampling the water? I
Well, that's
honestly don't
just-
trust it.
You know, and there would be, you know, ongoing oversight of that work. too.
Who's gonna do the oversight? I mean, who's gonna,
Well, I mean, we're gonna be still involved in the project.
oh, you're gonna be
Yes.
looking at it for how many years?
It's basically, yeah, I mean, basically, there's a requirement for them to continue. I mean, and again, that would be laid out right now. It's not,
Well,
In the consent
technically, after the remedy is implemented and they sign off on it, they're supposed to revisit the remedy every 5 years and then release a report that is available to the public on if the remedy is working still, if the caps don't fall apart.
To me, it's every 5 years.
Well, I'm
All
telling
right,
you what.
okay, so one, I'm gonna say if there are questions about the federal Superfund site process, we will have a dedicated working session in June, because this will,
We need to talk about these letters.
we need to talk about the letters. We'll come back and revisit this about what needs to happen going forward.
I think that's a great idea because there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean,
And also about the getting more time for submitting comments, both at state and federal level.
and we could even do an extended time period if we want to go longer than 2 hours. So let us talk about that at the end, because it's,
Although, I'm thinking to myself, if the comment period, and I know it's only talkable about legality, but it's only 60 days and we have a meeting in 30 days.
then if we want to move it up, that's
I
the
think
decision
maybe
of
we
the
should think
CAG.
about that.
So let's
But,
talk about that.
Again, and with these letters, perhaps that could be kind of a segue of
Well, it's
what
supposed to
any
be.
of
That's next item.
yeah, of what any of these public comment periods really mean. And I know that I've asked you plenty of times, I've asked Ms. Seppi plenty of times, that these public comment periods, these comments are taken into consideration, but that's practically it,
Yeah, okay.
right? You just, like,
You're talking about
because
EPA's public comment periods or the borough's public, I mean,
Any-
there's all this various.
any public comment periods,
discussed
because
there.
the letter here from Leclerc and Ryan, whoever's attorney firm that is, and then our borough manager, Mr. Heck from Ringwood, they're using these public comment periods as shields to actually put on the guise that the community
Yes.
was involved in some kind of
Stand
decision-making
by,
process.
stand by,
And that's
because
just
we're
not the
going there
case.
next.
And
So,
you're right, is the illusion
Yes.
of community involvement.
the item on the table is that the CAG will need a dedicated work session on the consent decree. We will look
That's why
at
it needs to be extended.
scheduling the next date by the conclusion of this meeting, coordinating with Joe and Pat's schedule to see what's available in lieu of a June meeting. Okay?
I'm waiting to find out about these attorneys.
I know, stand by. All right, item, next update,
You like that word?
yes?
Good, stand by.
Stand by. Unfortunately, way too many friends and others who are in the military. response to letters relating to OCDA land use. What this is in regards to,
Wait a minute, what are you looking at that I don't have?
right here, agenda,
Oh, the agenda, okay.
agenda, okay. I want to say, was it back in February that there was a presentation about the solar array? There's a working session in February for the CAG. Somebody,
Councilwoman O'Keefe.
Councilwoman O'Keefe did a presentation on the solar array. It led to a question of what is the preferred land use for securing the cap? And a letter was sent out to Ford and to the borough asking if it was possible to revisit the relocation of the recycling center as the land use that would secure the cap. Okay? So those letters went out. We talked about it, I think, at the March meeting, sent them out, and this is the response. So the attorneys are for Ford. That is Ford's legal counsel. The attorney, the letter from the attorneys.
The Claire Ryan?
Yeah, Joseph, what?
Logiteria.
Yeah, Logiteria. Thank you very much.
I got some problems with the way he,
Yes.
the response here.
Yes.
So,
And then there was the response letter from the borough.
They're practically the same thing.
And there was also,
They are practically the same thing. It's like the attorneys wrote it together.
there was also a letter dated March 13th that was sent out earlier. You've got a copy. And this was the letter of response from EPA. Okay, so EPA,
we're just getting that, we're not getting double, we're getting triple, so, yeah, it's like.
and because much of the letters from Ford Legal Counsel and from the borough talk about public comment periods as if they were public comment periods for discussing whether or not the recycling center should go on the cap. I sent out an email. If you do not have the email, let me get it for you. An email went out to send these out, and this is what, I mean, I literally sent it out yesterday, that's why I couldn't mail it. That this group has been talking about user-friendly information. So information that is accurate, that's easy to access, it's easy to understand, and it's relevant to the decisions being made. And looking at this, I sent out in the email that there are inaccuracies about what those public comment periods relate to, because some of them clearly relate to the capping remedy and really do not relate to the discussion about whether or not the recycling center is the right final land use. Just because there is a meeting where the recycling center gets raised as a topic doesn't mean that there's actually opportunity for public comment into the decision. And I flagged that to say that's not accurate. This listing is a listing of meetings. It does not necessarily reflect the public opportunity to comment on it. Now, setting that aside, what is the essence of the response? The response from Ford is that
That there was sufficient public comment and
no,
public involvement.
that's not the issue. Actually, that's if you take all of that away, the essence of it is that Ford's legal counsel comes at the last sentence and says, EPA cannot change at this juncture a key component of the OCDA selected remedy, the recycling center, but Joe, is the recycling center actually a key component of the OCDA selected remedy?
It's not a component of the
Excuse
OC.
me. You have to stand up here
Oh.
because this is
Oh.
not.
Thank you. Thank you
So,
for reminding
so if anybody's gonna speak,
Public
can
comments, please.
anybody?
Stand by the
Okay.
music stand, yes.
Okay,
And
orders
face the
again.
camera.
Technically, the recycling center is not a component of the contingency remedy. It is, however, the intended land use, which is addressing EPA's concerns, which allows selecting the contingency remedy.
One more time on it in English.
I'm trying to be as clear as I can. So basically, it's essentially, again, our selected remedy was our contingency remedy is essentially containment, putting a cap over the waste material. And that's being driven by the intended future land use, which the borough is indicating, which is the construction of a recycling center there, which addresses some of our initial concerns with regards to that capping remedy.
What happened to Walter Mugden standing up in front of everybody and saying, we are going to dig up O'Connor disposal area and we're going to get rid of it, and telling the whole world up here, we made a mistake, we're going to make sure that we do that, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, this comes out
Okay,
as a remedy, and you know, like, how
Here's-
can you?
here's where we are on the letters. The letter was sent to Ford.
You went too far already.
The letter was sent to Ford and the borough saying, is it possible to reopen discussions on the final land use at OCDA? And in essence, what we have in the letter is both of them deflected the question and did not answer the question. So Ford could have said, we do not want to reopen discussions at this time. Instead, they said, EPA cannot change this. Is that true?
Well, why would they want to reopen it?
Well, as far as, can we change the recycling center? We don't have the authority to change the
It's not-
recycling center. It's not part of our
It's not
remedy.
relevant.
It's intended land use.
They said it's up to you.
So are you saying that if the town were to change the remedy,
Well, the town would
the
be.
EPA is only concerned with putting the cap on, not what necessarily goes on that cap?
Well, basically, we're concerned, I mean, again, putting the recycling center on addressed some of our concerns with regards to the containment remedy, which was why it wasn't initially selected. We were concerned about the fact that maintenance of that cap impact.
Joe,
Security and so forth.
Security and
It's protected.
So, but if something else were to be put on that cap or near that cap, you're not going to necessarily be opposed to that.
We will, no, we would have to look at that proposal.
Okay.
so Ford did not answer the question. They said EPA cannot change it, which is not what we're hearing from EPA, but they did not answer the question of would they be willing to reopen it. Also, when the borough of Ringwood,
Wait a minute, hold it, stop. We're going back to this letter, sorry.
okay,
Because paragraph 3, and then you'll see it in the back too, when they say, all right, they came here in 2012 and 13, blah, 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 the CAG, and blah, 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 you know. Set comments and both times seeking the full excavation of it, but no offering no alternatives for its use. I know the word, I'm just telling you.
yeah,
So, I for one have requested since 2006 or whatever to have our land use back for the people.
Right.
Or the thought of having a nice park or something. Or, again, there's the third option is a center
right.
for the upper,
Yes.
yes. So, but they're saying nobody,
So-
offered no other
The
alternative.
question is not about whether, really, the question of whether they think there was public comment into this or not. The question is are they willing to revisit it at this time and talk about it? And nobody actually answered that question. They provided a list of public meetings, which does not answer the question. And the actual
Where's
question,
that list then?
that's on these pages. So Borough of Ringwood provides some, there's meeting dates here, but
If you look at the third paragraph
Yeah.
on each of these letters, one from
Yes.
Ringwood, one from Ford's attorneys, they both are claiming that there was
Yes.
sufficient public comment received.
and it doesn't matter. See, here's the thing, hold it.
kinda does.
Regardless of whether it's irritating or not, hold it, stay with me.
No, I'm listening.
Whether there was or wasn't adequate public comment it doesn't matter, because the question is can we talk about it now?
Yes.
That was the question that was asked. Regardless of what you think we've talked about it, we don't think so. They obviously do. You know, the CAG says, we don't think we've discussed this. Ford says, we think we did discuss this. Doesn't matter. The question is, can it be looked at now? And neither one of these,
But the answer is yes, it can.
physically it could, and it went back to the PRP saying, would you be willing to discuss this? And actually, neither one of them answered the question.
Right.
So that's,
And can I just make one comment?
Here,
Yes.
okay.
Again, going back to the law,
Yeah.
which I hate to use things that are actually real, but the zoning for this property is a conservation zone. And the recycling center is not a permitted use on a piece of property that's zoned for conservation. And if you want to go further and actually look at the township's zoning ordinance, okay, the recycling center is not a use that is a use of essential services, which would permit something if it was essential to be built there, but a recycling center is not considered an essential service. So since this is zoned as a conservation, they can't legally use this property because it's not zoned for the use that they're saying that they want to use.
and EPA's response letter from March 3rd,
Sorry, I still want to go back
Okay,
to
hold-
that letter.
Does anybody want a copy or a copy of the map? Because I have both of them.
okay, but here's the thing, is EPA's response at the bottom of paragraph 2 is, however, as we would at any site, we will continue to evaluate new data and information as it is generated to ensure that cleanup action remains protective. They also do not say, no, we wouldn't consider it. So the question was asked, and none of the responses actually answered the question. So that's where it's at.
All right, I'm taking notice. You stopped up here on there, but I'm looking down the bottom. Both of these letters, the one from the attorneys and the one from Scott Hay. Who decided to CC these people? Who? I don't
We
know.
did, when we sent the letter out. When we sent the letter, when the CAG asked the letter to be sent out to the potentially responsible parties, there was a discussion of who needed to be CC'd, and there were elected officials.
All right, wait a minute. Do I know Mary Ann Lynn?
No, I don't know that.
Do you know? I know.
Wait, who's this?
Oh, no, she's the woman that comes to the meetings all the time.
They asked to sign on, we sent out a letter, and said if anybody else wants to sign on to the letter,
Yeah,
then
she's
go
very
ahead.
Oh, when they CC him. Okay,
Yes,
so Janet and Mary Ann both that asked
Yeah,
that you do that.
yeah.
Because the towns and the attorneys before, they CC the same people,
Yeah.
so.
They're just people,
Yeah.
they go to all the meetings, just like everyone.
The letter really should be modified, I think, and sent out again, because it should be using the legal terminology that's required regarding the zoning and whether or not the O'Connor disposal area can legally be put on this property because it is not zoned according to the township's zoning laws, and we can cite the zoning ordinance, but that is really the question. It's not, can we revisit it? Is it legal to put a recycling
So
center?
this, right now, what I'm going to ask is, on the letters, the CAG drafted a letter, and on behalf of the CAG, per the discussion at the March meeting, sent it out to the PRPs. We got these responses back that really just don't answer the question, but certainly do not engage opening the discussion.
Well, the question can go to the PRP, just go to EPA, and it should go to
It's
the
not
state.
EPA's,
It is EPA's decision.
no, it's not. So we.
It should be.
Well, and there is, if we want to stay discussing this all night long, we can. I strongly suggest that it go to a dedicated meeting in 2 weeks, because there is also a parallel process for groundwater, and the OU3 feasibility study is getting ready to move forward, and we really should have that presentation tonight.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so with that,
That doesn't change the fact
No.
that we should resend out the letters like I recommended, because
Absolutely.
you will get a different response if you ask legally whether or not
Yep,
that can be put on because it's not zoned and provides the zoning ordinances that show what the actual zone is, and send it to EPA and town, because that is the question. Not
okay.
whether you can revisit it.
I need to
Whether
take
it's
5
legal.
minutes to turn over to DEP for the update on NERDA, because at the last meeting, Vivian and other CAG members asked what needs to be done to try and have attention turned to the NRDA,
Say what it is.
natural resource damage assessment for the loss of natural resource
If
services.
damages to
Yes.
the natural resources of the United States,
Yes,
which includes groundwater.
Rich?
So I just want to get this straight.
Yeah.
The resolution was in December of 2013 for the recycling center, which was about a year and a half before the ESD.
Yes,
Okay.
But the town, but the CAG was not made aware of that at the time.
here's what happened, the reason this is coming up is
You're right.
Yeah, 5.5 years ago.
in when the recycling center proposal came forward, and John Spear and Joe Gowers, if you can help ground truth this. This was a proposal that was developed by the PRPs
Or the
and
PRPs.
submitted to EPA. So it's not that it came forward and that people had an opportunity to discuss this. It came as a package proposal. And it's like, it's a question of horse and cart. Do you say, here's the solution that will protect the cap, if we want to do a consolidate and cap? Or is it, in order to have a consolidate and cap approach, what would be the best use to protect it? And you can go about it either way, but the way it was done is that the solution was proposed first, instead of having a discussion to say, what should we do to protect the cap? And
Well, actually, I was there
Okay.
at that time period, and what it really amounted to was, that was put out is, how do we end up with this remedy that's gonna end up getting the township money from Ford, which is about a $10 million payoff, and then, and then the remedy was not presented to the public. It was presented as a removal. And then the deal was done, and this was just told that this is the way it's gonna be.
right,
And the ESD was issued without any discussion to the CAG or to the public. And if there was a resolution at the township, it wasn't even shared with the CAG, we were led to believe that the OCD was
So-
gonna be removed.
there were.
So was there something illegal that went wrong there?
Well, I don't know,
Yeah,
but I could say that it's illegal, it's certainly immoral, but, you have the.
We're gonna not take questions on this,
Yeah,
we are gonna
saying
move
that.
to the next agenda
That's
item.
it.
The next one is going to be presentation from Ken Petrone with Department of Environmental Protection. They presented on the Natural Resource Damage Assessment Program a couple months ago, within the last 6 months. And this has been flagged, Ringwood Mines has been brought to the attention of the NRDA team. And it has not moved forward to actually have an assessment done. And the CAG members asked what could be done to help encourage an assessment being taken. So
Are you
Ken,
talking about by the federal trustees?
no, it's the state, yeah. So Ken, go ahead.
So, yes, so one of the handouts
This
that I
one?
brought that looks like that is just some of the information off of our website, off of the Office of Natural Resource Restoration Program. Gives you some contact information and some information about how they function, how they operate. I had handed this out previously.
Yeah.
This is a little bit updated since the one I handed out, so I brought some more. anyway, that's where you get all your information about the ONNR group that does these assessments. So one thing I can tell you for sure is that the consent decree does not release the PRPs from their liability for natural resource damages. So that's a good thing. It means that it's still something that is, the door's still open. Signing the consent decree and filing the consent decree will not release PRPs from any liability to deal with natural resource injuries or damages.
Can you define what the state considers damages, what resources?
Well, some of that is explained on this website. So no, it's not my program. I'm not an expert on that, so I don't want to.
What is it?
It addresses natural resources, biota, living things, and plants, and threatened and endangered species, wetlands, streams, everything natural that is a natural resource. And they look, and it includes groundwater.
Is the fact that this is up in the Highlands, the fact that?
Not in the
No, because it was exempt in like 2006, the area got exempted by application of our borough to exempt the area.
So here's the status. It's been brought to the attention of our group, our ONNR group. I talked to the people there. They are not looking at it right now. Their priorities are set by the commissioner. They have other priorities right now that they're working on, so it's not on their schedule to look at Ringwood. The best you can do if you want it to be a priority is write to the commissioner, and they ask her to make it a priority. And I thought somebody mentioned that at the last CAG meeting, that was going to happen. I don't think it has happened yet.
I asked the borough to do it. I went to a meeting and explained it to the council and asked them if they would write a letter, and they just ignored it, basically. So I'll ask again, but you had also mentioned we could maybe write you, but now you've spoken to them, we have to write the commissioner.
And I talked to the head of that group, and they said the commissioner sets their priorities. So they would gladly look at it if they were told by the commissioner to look at this. I'm sure you've seen the newspaper, they have a lot of other priorities right now. There's been a lot of lawsuits filed by the Attorney General.
Easy lawsuits.
Right, so that's what they're very busy with. It's a small group, they're very busy with that right now. They'd be glad to look at it if the commissioner told them to look.
And who is the commissioner?
McCabe. Catherine McCabe.
Can you define what is the criteria?
Actually, we're not going to get into that, and
Well,
here's, no, Bob, here's why.
I want to ask the question, so can you please be quiet for a second? What is the criteria? Well, I keep getting interrupted every time I say something.
She's running the meeting.
I don't care. I shouldn't get interrupted every time I ask a question.
Okay, Bob, here's why. The question was, there was a presentation on criteria, and I know it's really hard when you've been out for so long.
But I just had one question.
Here's the thing. The question was posed is what needs to happen in order to get this to the attention. It has to be sent to the commissioner, and I think the question of clarification is there was a request from Bank Hall to the borough. The borough's not moving forward on that. Would a letter from the CAG, could the CAG send a letter?
Any letter will help,
Okay.
yes. So the CAG is certainly welcome to send a letter.
And Bob, I will have you ask a question of clarification outside because we now have 45 minutes for this meeting and we need to address OU3.
But
That's
you can't give one sentence of.
No, I can't. So the next item is going to be OU3. Ken, can you address him after the meeting or outside? You guys can step out. Joe, I'm going to ask you to come up because the next item is OU3 groundwater revised feasibility study.
How do I ask a question?
Yes, please do. That would be very helpful if people
If I
raise their
did,
hands.
would
Yes.
you
No,
interrupt me if I asked a question?
it depends on the timeline. Since we're at 45 minutes, I probably would ask to defer it. Joe, could you tell us about OU3 feasibility study?
Sure. I mean, as you're aware, during our last meeting, we had discussed the fact that we had received comments from the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission on the draft site-related groundwater focus feasibility study report. basically, what we did, and I'll explain the whole process since then, is that we did take those comments and we did ask for Cornerstone to take a look at those comments and to try to respond to those comments, since the comments were on their work product. Cornerstone did submit some draft responses to EPA, the state of New Jersey. We took a look at those responses, and then we had a conference call involving both Ken Petrone, myself, our geologist, my branch chief.
John, could you maybe just stand a little to the side so you're back and
Sure.
totally to that?
It's being watched.
So we had a conference call basically to discuss those responses and basically see where we all were with regards to how we should best address the comments from the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. During that call, we found that as far as the major key components of those comments, that we were all essentially on the same page with regards to that. During that meeting, it was mentioned, Ken Petrone specifically mentioned that he thought that some visual aids would help during the presentation to the CAG of our position with regards to these comments. And for that reason, we did ask Cornerstone to prepare some visual aids, which I believe were provided on the back table. There's a product called Ringwood Minds, what we know, how we know it, and why it matters to the groundwater focused feasibility study, which basically lays out not only the position with regards to these key comments, but also the information which supports that determination. It lays out what we know, essentially summarizing what we know with regards to the Peters Mine Pit, Cat Mine Pit, pond disposal area, and then groundwater in general and surface water. Now, as far as those comments, what we boil it down to is that the four major concerns are noted on this PowerPoint. Removal and treatment of water in the PMP air shaft should be considered, as one is to look at a pump and treat alternative in the air shaft. An additional study objective should have been to further sample more of the mine shaft network to determine if there's a discrete source. We thought maybe we should have done a directional boring program to try to investigate the extensive flooded mines. They indicated that they thought we were short-sighted to assume that 1,4-dioxane contamination in mine water was just limited to the PMP air shaft. And then they thought that there should be additional surface water sampling on an ongoing basis. So with regards to those comments, before we discuss that, I wanted to just sort of give an overview of basically what we know about each of the areas of concern, and we have some visual items to help discuss that. The first is going to be that we're going to be looking at a cross-section of the Peters Mine Pit area and the flooded mines, and this line just represents the cut line where that cross-section is going to be. And this figure basically displays what we kind of know about the Peters Mine Pit and the Peters Mine. Basically what you can see here, you can see about 100 feet deep Peters Mine Pit, which is filled with waste material and mine tailings. And then coming off that pit, there's an inclined shaft that goes down over 2,000 feet. You see that long shaft going all the way down. And then off that inclined shaft, there are actually 17 layers of or levels of the mine off which they basically mine ore. All this whole network, of course, is now flooded, and that goes down about 1,400 feet below ground surface. The air shaft that we're always talking about that we sample is basically represented on the figure, and you can see that's 230 feet deep, and it looks like it intercepts.
Where is that air
That would
shaft?
be,
Point that out.
yes, the air shaft is right here. I should have a more pointer, but the air shaft is right here, and intercepts the inclined shaft right about here, which is between level 3 and level 4. Oh, you
Look
can-
on your map, here it
okay.
is right here.
Oh.
Do you have a cat? I know.
So basically, we're looking at like level 3 and level 4 of the,
There's a foldout in your handout.
there, of the mine network. Now, you also can see the general direction of water flow. Generally, the direction of groundwater flow is up through the mine, and then of course, basically down into the valley, and then following down the Park Brook, and we'll see more of that in the next figure.
The water doesn't go up and down?
The water, basically, the water tends to go upward.
When it's flooding?
You're like a spring, right?
Just, it's basically the natural direction seems
Yeah.
to be slowly upward in the mine network,
And then it
up
reaches-
through the bedrock, into the shallows, and then that water, as we'll see in the next figure, basically, you have an upward gradient and down valley, essentially discharging to the surface water bodies. So basically, it's a Park Brook.
How does it get into the groundwater?
How does this work?
The contamination?
Well, 1,4-dioxane,
It's fractured bedrock.
Oh, I know. But it goes, so that would be seeping down as well as going up.
well, I mean, the source, we believe any sort of source of the 1,4-dioxane is actually down in the mine network
Yeah.
itself. So that, anything that comes off of that will tend to go upward in the water, in the shafts, and then it would basically, since the groundwater direction seems to be downstream, basically following through down valley and upward, that would come up from the bedrock into the unconsolidated materials and then essentially discharge into the streams.
So it moves up to the aquifer, and then when it hits that plane,
That's the
it starts
upper
to move down.
aquifer, right?
Which aquifer?
Yeah, the overburden,
Yeah.
the overburden and then bedrock.
So what about the deep aquifer? Is it there too?
Yes, and we're saying basically what we see is that a general upward flow of groundwater from the
Yeah,
bedrock
I understand.
into that, yeah. So it's moving, it's all moving upward is essentially what we see.
Where does EPA think the source materials are generally contributing to the pollution?
Well, given the fact that the highest levels of 1,4-dioxane are detected at 230 feet in the air shaft, we would assume that any sort of small source or diffuse source would be somewhere within the mine network.
Okay, so here's this is the overlay presentation.
And then the next figure basically just shows us, again, generally groundwater flow from the Peters Mine pit area down along the Park Brook. And again, what we're seeing is a general flow down, basically downstream and upward, and essentially discharging to the stream. So as we point out here, up near the Peters Mine pit area, we have some, it's a recharge zone, and we have instances where sometimes the flow is up, sometimes the flow is down in localized areas up in that area, with it tending to become more generally upward as we move further south of the Peters Mine area.
How do the seeps work? Where are seeps in relation to the flow? How do they, because there's at least 2 or 3 seeps.
Yeah, the seeps are basically groundwater. They're basically groundwater discharging to the
SR3?
Yes.
So
yeah.
they just occur, but they're not kind of mapped on this?
Yeah, they're not mapped on this specific figure. This is just a generalized figure trying to demonstrate the direction of groundwater flow moving south of the Peters Mine area.
And you've got the larger surface water bodies up.
Yeah, I know. They're trying to, the way it's displayed here, actually this is along, you can see it's along the Park Brook, so this is all the Park Brook's supposed to be just back here along this.
What are the recommendations
Yes.
from?
It's a weird way to look at the way they have that.
So it's from the air shaft to the right, it's traffic south.
It's basically traveling south. You're traveling down Brook, so you're traveling essentially south this way.
What's happening underground?
Underground, as we're indicating here.
You're saying it's all bubbling up.
We're saying it's slowly moving upward. That's the
Going into
direction
the
of ground
streams,
flow. Discharge,
into the
which is what you would expect when you come from a higher area of mountains to a valley and surface.
But what about recommendations that we've seen from our technical advisor, which says that you need deeper groundwater wells because there's 1,4-dioxane especially
Well,
deep in the shaft.
that's right, we are, and we do have some deep wells there, but
But
as
you're
far
not
as,
showing that now.
No, this is the general hydrology.
it's just, yeah, just general
okay.
hydrology in the area,
General.
again, moving south. We understand that the 1,4-dioxane,
Is
essentially, it starts low. I mean, you see the
Right.
highest levels at the bottom of the air shaft.
Right.
So,
So
and then it's
water's
gonna move
seeping
up.
down too, is what I'm trying to say.
What we're trying to say is that 1,4-dioxane, the water, since the source is down already,
Yeah,
it's
It's
tending to
coming
move up.
tending.
Right, but
Yes.
remember.
But it
this
could
was
be
a
going
mine.
down into a
They
fracture.
blasted the mine.
Well, some of those wells, some of those are rock wells. Those red
Are
lines
they
going
very
down.
deep?
Yeah, they're in bedrock.
Well,
those
this-
wells.
Right,
So they're
okay.
measuring
RW11 is
water in that
basically
bedrock that we
Okay.
a
talked
little bit
about.
deeper than the air shaft.
Yeah, but I just feel like this whole presentation is just focusing on what's happening to, I guess, to the surface water. And
So,
not,
but I think one way to think about it is the deeper you go,
yeah,
the tighter the rock gets, and the
Right.
less fractured it is. So it's like there's a lot more water coming in from the surface, from rainfall
right,
and the valleys down the mountains. So there's a lot of water coming in, and as it fills up in the mine shafts and in the mine workings, there's nowhere for it to go except up.
up,
So that's why it's tending to go up, because as you go deeper in the mine shaft, it's very tight and there's nowhere else for the water to go. So it pushes the 1,4-dioxane up to the
But
air
I
shaft
do
and
know
out to the
that-
overburden.
there are recommendations for more deep wells
Yes, there were,
from North Jersey and also from our technical advisor.
yeah, and we can, get onto that. I mean, if you look
Right.
at the feasibility study, you'll see that there are provisions to install some deeper sentinel wells, just
Correct.
to ensure that,
We know what's going
we
on.
know what's going on, we know if it's moving further south and we need to do so.
Because in the deeper wells, there is contamination.
There is some, yes, and
Yeah.
it's closest to the air shaft is where it's working.
Exactly.
Right. And so
That's
there
why
will
they
be
want to pump
deeper,
and treat it.
there will be some deep wells added,
Right.
the sentinel wells.
Well, I mean, basically, you're indicating the pumping tree, and we're
Yeah.
gonna get to that in more detail.
Okay.
But, as you know, the feasibility study also looked at some in-situ treatments.
Oh, I know.
Do you agree with the findings that were presented about Peter's Mine, it not being the only source of 1,4-dioxane? What you had stated correct in the beginning of the presentation? You had said that they said that it was.
The Jacobs comment.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, and we're gonna work our way through to that, but, yeah, basically, they're saying that we shouldn't assume that the air shaft is the only area where there's 1,4-dioxane, and we totally agree. We're assuming that it's elsewhere in the mines, and I know I've said that a number of times, that, our assumption is, it's all interconnected. That air shaft isn't isolated, it's connected to the whole mine network, all that water is connected, and we're seeing the air shaft, it's likely that it's elsewhere within that mine network. So basically, for the Peters Mine Pit area, again, what our findings, vast interconnected mine network. You saw the 17 levels of the mine going down about 1,400 feet. The groundwater flow is generally upward. Discharge is to the stream valleys and ultimately to the surface water within those stream valleys. And with the part per billion concentrations that we're seeing in there, we basically believe that we're looking at there's either some sort of small sources. I believe Cornerstone actually did a calculation of if all that water in the air, in the mine, the flooded mines, contained 82 parts per billion of 1,4-dioxane, which is the concentration that we saw in the air shaft during the last sampling round. You would only need about 2 gallons of 1,4-dioxane to basically contaminate that water at that sort of level. So it doesn't take a lot of material to basically lead to 82 parts per billion within the water in the mine.
Still not good.
no, it's not good, it's definitely above groundwater quality standards.
Pretty high. But saying potent, you can have small sources would give you.
You can have a small amount of the source to give you that much.
And what was the volume of water? 2 million gallons?
213 million.
213.
Thank you. Final Jeopardy.
And now again, we're looking at the Catamine pit area, and this is going to be the cross section we're looking at, cut across the pit area and the air shaft, the elevator shaft rather. Again, very similar, well, sort of similar to the Peters Mine pit area. You have a pit, a mine pit, and off that pit there are several levels. There are 4 levels of mine going down about 500 feet, and they all connect to the Catamine, the elevator shaft, right there in the corner of Milligan. And generally, you know, the pit is at the top of a groundwater divide, so groundwater is basically up, but towards, again, the surface water, the valleys, the surface water bodies in the area of the mine brook. And it's just, again, indicating that it's similar to the Peters Mine, 4 levels, about 500 feet deep, upward groundwater flow, discharging to the stream valleys, and again, given the very low, because there was some very, very low levels of 1,4-dioxane detected in the elevator shaft and in a well adjacent to the elevator shaft, then again, we would be looking at some sort of very, very small source or a diffuse source within the mine network.
Are there going to be any more wells, drilled around that area?
Again, you know, in terms of what's needed as far as our ultimate monitoring well network, sentinel wells, that will be determined during the design phase. So it'll be determined then, because we also have to work with the state of New Jersey to establish a classification exemption area. And as part of that, the state of New Jersey is going to have some requirements in terms of the sentinel wells and so forth, and a monitoring frequency.
What about the relationship between these mines that we went through and the impacts to surface water that we've seen with the seeps and 1,4-dioxane and benzene?
Well, I mean, we see what's going on. Basically, the water from the mines and that area is essentially coming up and discharging to those surface water bodies. That's why we see 1,4-dioxane in the Park Brook, for instance. And we see that down to about Sally's Pond, where it's basically diluted to the point where it's no longer detected coming out of Sally's Pond.
Is there going to be any way that EPA can, when you're doing, this general overview, it doesn't really take those into account, and it doesn't look like any potential remedy is going to really look at to address those, and they're really more of, I think, a risk to children, maybe playing in unintentionally. Is there going to be somehow that consideration as you develop this?
Well, I mean, there was a risk assessment that was conducted, and basically we are looking at active remedies to try to address what essentially we're looking at the site-wide groundwater, as well as specifically the Peters Mine pit air shaft, which quite honestly should be what we should be targeting, because that's where the highest levels are.
But you also have SR3 too, which is relatively constant seed that after they move the waste, that's also now a seed.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, there is a groundwater issue within the Peters Mine pit area, and that's one of the things we'll be looking at, is trying to address water. We're looking at site-wide groundwater, as well as specifically the air shaft to address.
So anywhere that discharges will be part of that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, we would be looking to try to reduce levels as necessary in those areas, and that's why we have remedial alternatives that we'll be looking at addressing either groundwater, site-specific groundwater, and or the Peters Mine.
Because I just was, you were using the terminology, I thought so, you were just looking at the groundwater and not any areas where the identified seeps
But I mean, all that will be continued, I mean, all that is going to be, is essentially going to be monitored. Whatever remedy is selected, there will be a groundwater monitoring program, there's going to be a surface water monitoring program.
Okay, how many gallons, what's the flow into Sally's Pond? Gallons?
Yeah, the flow in, and you haven't had any idea what that was, I mean, we looked at it a while back.
That's 213 pretty quick.
And also, you got to keep in mind that it's also intermittent.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have looked into it, and we're trying to do a modeling.
If you could stand up.
Yeah, you gotta come up.
We had looked into that when we were doing the modeling for the assessment of the potential impacts of the Ringwood reservoir. And it really varies anywhere from 0 to hundreds of cubic feet per second because it's all dependent on rainfall. The testing that was done on the surface waters most recently in 2017 and 2018, which Joe was going to get to, I'm sure, where a number of surface water samples were added downstream of Sally's Pond, was done during drier weather. So it was typically low cubic feet per second, 5 to 10 if I remember.
So the Park Brook, in terms of like a ratio of the inflow into Sally's from the mine site, is like 10 to 1, 50 to 1?
Oh, trivial, more probably like thousands. Ringwood Creek is a pretty significant contributor, but not Park Brook.
Park Brook is pretty small.
Very small.
Yeah, it gets
Remember,
pretty
you
dry.
got Park Brook, and I believe there were 2 other brooks going into Sally's Pond. Sally's Pond goes down Ringwood Creek, and then there's more brooks coming, the Mine Brook, I believe, comes into
Into
Ringwood-
Sally's Pond
Ringwood
is
Creek after
Park
Sally's
Brook, North Brook, and Ringwood Creek. Ringwood Creek continues out. Mine Brook, which comes around the Cannon Mine Pit, comes in downstream of Sally's Pond. And Ringwood Creek is the major tributary from this area into
That runs along Slopesburg Road from like the Soil and Forest area, if you've ever seen it.
And when you look at it in terms of going to the Wanacue Reservoir, you were about 80%, and meaning the Ringwood Creek.
the Ringwood Creek.
Yes,
Yes.
Ringwood Creek.
But all those streams are connected.
Well, they all basically are tributaries to, yeah,
They all go the same place.
they all go
Yes.
down to the,
Go into the ocean.
Okay.
Second.
And here again, we're looking at a cross-section of, quickly of the O'Connor disposal area, going from, west to east. And again, here, basically, what we're seeing is just, the O'Connor disposal area was not a mine. It was what was called, used for as a slime pond, basically, mine tailings. When they removed the iron, the leftover pieces, the fines, were discharged and disposed of in this area. And then for disposed of materials on top of that at a later time. I don't see groundwater flow here, but that would be down towards the Park Brook also. Just reiterate some of what I just said, but I also wanted to point out that we also, as you recall, did a potential source investigation within the O'Connor disposal area because we were getting somewhat elevated levels of 1,4-dioxane in one well in the O'Connor disposal area pretty much consistently, well OB17. That investigation included a collection of 43 samples, soil samples. It also included a collection of some paint sludge. There were some chunks of paint sludge there, so some paint sludge samples were collected, and 1,4-dioxane wasn't detected in any of those materials.
Was that paint sludge removed, or was that a different time they removed paint sludge from the?
Well, in 2010, there was a bulk removal of the paint sludge when they were doing that large-scale trenching program. And in the O'Connor disposal area, they removed 2,500 tons, something in that area of material. However, it wasn't a complete removal of paint sludge from that area. There could still be chunks and chips of paint sludge around that area. When we were doing this investigation, there were a few chunks of paint sludge identified remaining in that area. So we basically collected.
Were those areas on not trenched previously or undiscovered, or were these areas?
Well, I mean, these weren't areas; these were just little individual chunks that were laying around. Probably remnants from the actual large-scale removal. that was conducted.
How about any drums, were any drums encountered?
Drums were encountered during the trenching program, not in that one paint, not in this paint sludge disposal area, but sort of towards the center of the O'Connor disposal area. I'm trying to recall the details about 3 or 4 drums maybe of material, and I believe some of that contained, it had PCB contained material.
Is that removed?
That was removed, yes.
Where's Slime Pond?
Well, Slime Pond is basically what they're calling what the O'Connor disposal area was used when as they call that, when they dispose of those fines from the mining process, those fine mine tailings.
The big orange one?
It's basically, it was basically not orange, but it was the.
If we're talking about by Peter's mine,
Yeah.
that's
the one.
that's not orange, that's purple. No, it's really
But
orange.
it's basically water mixed with those fines was discharged into that area, and then water settled out and left behind the fine mine tailings. On top of that, later, Ford came along and basically disposed of their materials.
Okay.
So now getting back to those 4 comments from the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission, removal and treatment of water at PMP air shaft should be considered. And I started discussing this during the last CAG meeting. Basically, we don't believe that separate removal of water, first of all, in that air shaft is possible because it's connected to all the rest of the flooded mines. You can't just simply pump out the Peters mine air shaft. What that means is that if you did start extracting water, you're not just going to pump that water out. You're then going to draw water from the entire mining network, potentially even
Which
to
is
Peters
far
mine,
wide,
even
right.
the pond. Some of that water, like in the pond, probably has very, very little 1,4 dioxide, so you'd be doing extensive water removal, and you'd be probably pulling in a lot of water that's not really containing elevated levels of 1,4 dioxide. So it would result in excessive handling of water, and basically, unlike when you pump an extraction well, where you're just trying to change the gradient so you create a capture zone, here you would actually be dewatering the mines.
But didn't they do that when they tried
Is
to
that
reopen the
bad?
mine? When they tried to reopen the mine originally, didn't they pump this out to get it down?
Well, they had to in order to because my understanding is the mines had to be flooded, and they had to at some point try to pump down the mines.
So they were able to do that.
No, it's not that can't be done. It's just that it would result in extensive pumping and dealing with a huge amount of water heater with very little benefit, given the fact that you would likely be pulling in water, a lot of water that doesn't contain elevated levels of 1,4 dioxide.
The only issue we can bring that up is because we still don't know if these mines have a significant volume of waste, because we calculated out, our engineer calculated out, potentially what could have been sent up here from the actual operations, and there was a lot more that is accounted for right now with anybody's calculations. And the mines are really, or at least another unknown area, are the only explanation for a large discrepancy about what has been taken out and down and what is still not accounted for.
Yeah, I mean, all we can tell you is, what we could investigate was basically down that air shaft, and we did the video cameras put down, and we did not observe any paint sludge or drums or anything down at the bottom of that air shaft. And that kind of leads into one of the other concerns about doing additional investigations within that mining network. Basically doing a directional boring program to try to locate the source of the 1,4 dioxide.
What about the benzene?
Well, I mean, again, there could be a source. I mean, there's clearly a source of benzene probably in there too, given the ice levels of benzene are also within the Peters Mine pit air shaft at the bottom of that air shaft.
So you think very similar area in the mine?
We don't know. I mean, that's part of the problem is trying to identify a source that could be a very small source, assuming that it's even a small source, it's not just diffuse within that mining network, when you have 17 levels of flooded mine going down 1,400 feet with a directional boring program. I mean, it basically becomes technically impractical because the odds of us actually hitting anything when you're drilling a hole down, and then you've got these extensive mine networks. The odds of us hitting something is like.
But Ringwood was not the only dumping. There was dumping from Ford and other.
Several different.
Other sites before.
But the big difference between the Ringwood site and those other sites is that our entity of our borough was complicit, which is also an important point to make.
Do you find any other freon in the surface water beyond the one sample that we found in the Seabun kind of?
I don't recall that being identified,
And the other.
other than I know that one seep on
Yeah.
Catamine Road there.
Was
Joe,
that
I
ever
wanna-
found again?
Check on this. How much time do you need to go through your presentation?
Well, it should be almost done.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just checking,
Yeah.
trying to, okay.
So basically, I mean, that explains why we feel that the groundwater extraction and treatment from the air shaft is really not feasible, and we would clearly prefer looking at alternatives that address it in situ.
So it's not feasible because you're taking in water that might not be contaminated.
You're going to be pumping extensive water with very little benefit, is what we're trying to say. Extensive amount of water with very little.
Why do you know that?
Because again,
Because
you're going to
maybe
be.
some of the water is contaminated.
That's correct, but we also know there are other areas, for instance, looking at the Peters Mine pit, which is apparently connected. We don't know if it's high, sealed so water can't flow in. We're seeing very little 1,4-dioxane in that. So if you start draining all that water too, you're basically going to be extracting water that's essentially clean.
One of the other questions when you start doing pumpetry is, are you going to be moving water that actually increases the level of contamination because now you have moving water instead of static water sources? And then there's the question of what does that do to your whole groundwater hydrology system once you start
That's
doing
correct too. That's an unknown. I mean, once you start pumping, you don't know how you're going to influence the current situation there. Right now, we understand what's,
Or if you
we
start
have a clear gradient as you move away. Once you start pumping, you don't know what the results are.
Look what happened when we did SR3, and then you had Roger DeGroot's backyard collapsed, and they took out SR3, so we started playing around. I have no idea what the possible outcome's going to be with subsidence. With, I do agree with you on that. I just don't know, if we had identified all the sources, if just to write this off. With
The problem, and that's what we're getting to here, is basically we believe it would be a futile attempt to try to identify a source within the flooded mines, given the fact, especially using a directional boring program. Given 17 levels going down 1,400 feet, trying to hit mines where I believe we're looking at the diagrams that were hand drawn from back in the 1940s.
Joe, we got a comment from you?
No, I just want to say I agree with what he's saying along with you because if you don't get what he's really saying, it's like when they was drilling before, because Peter's mine is connected,
Oh, no, I understand.
Cooper's connected,
Yeah, Cooper's
and
connected.
then, Hope is connected, and it's connected, like all the way to Sterling.
So,
You
it's
got
scary
that
to you.
It's scary to me because,
De-water,
yes,
you
I'm
don't want it
afraid.
pumped out.
I don't want any machinery, I'm afraid because I don't know, it could be my house, could be somebody else's, to just do
The in
so.
situ treatment,
Like a sinkhole?
though, it's got to be done right. That's the key.
I just don't want no drilling.
I'm not disagreeing with
Yeah,
what you're
that's-
saying. It's just.
I mean, that's what's currently, the remedies that are looked at are basically in situ for the
And
Peters
really
Mine area.
robust monitoring afterwards.
Yeah, any of the remedies would involve a robust monitoring program, groundwater service. And again, this is just what we were just saying about why we feel it's futile to basically do this additional investigation within the actual mining network, this proposal to do a directional boring program, or recommendation to do a directional boring program for the Merchant Board Supply Commission.
Have you responded back to them about that?
We have not at this point responded back to them. We wanted to come to you first and basically.
Well, when you do respond, you tell them that the residents, you know, we're in agreement with you because of the fear of the unknown
Mhm.
and what we've already experienced, you know, that we're not interested. Maybe they should come to a meeting and find out, you know, to see.
Yeah, well, they were aware there was a meeting. I
They
just think we
have
talked about our
to,
list.
like, really make sure that they're right, that they really are right, that they know that there are no significant sources that are just not seeping now, but over time, you know, things change it, and you know better than anybody. But
I know.
But
Would
that's,
you like me?
yeah.
All right, do you want me to just walk out? Listen,
No.
I will tell you, Jack Walker was on this board. The house that I live in, him and his sister said they used to walk right up the back door, and they used to walk down steps there and walk down into Peter's mine, all right? From the house.
I remember.
Him and his sister sat and, you know, they related these stories to us. I don't wanna, you know, wake up and find all this gone or that, and, you know, like, it's scary, you know?
I agree with you, I'm not disagreeing.
You know, it's a touchy situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the EPA and Ford, you know, when the Cooper mine did collapse, they said it didn't have anything to do with your water.
True, because they said they weren't doing drilling, and I observed, and I watched them drilling, I listened, you know, I was out there and trying to be on site and pay attention to everything that happened.
I know,
And someplace, probably not in this book, but whatever, it's written down.
right?
So,
Rich thinks it was the vibration, not the drill.
Well, that's what we, that was what
Vibration,
we, the
Murray,
concern
yeah.
I thought was raised to us, the fact that they were clearing, doing clearing across, over in the entire disposal area, and the thought.
And moving the water.
Well,
No,
we're doing water,
don't
we're
talk
just
to
trying to
EPA.
clear the
Changing,
vibration.
yeah.
And that could
Okay.
have released the pressure.
And then, I guess the next comment, that indicated that we were short-sighted for us to assume that 1,4-dioxane contamination in the mine water is limited to the Peach Mine pit air shaft. Again, as indicated earlier, we don't assume that. We assume that there's probably more 1,4-dioxane within the waters. It's all interconnected. But our feeling is that we have a good understanding of the groundwater and surface water situation up in that area based upon all the sampling that's been conducted over the years. 26 events since 2004, groundwater sampling, surface water sampling, mine sampling, and we believe that we have a good representation of the groundwater.
What is that definition of event?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that. Is that exceedances? Are events exceedances? What does event mean?
26 events, it means 26 groundwater sampling events.
Oh, okay.
I figured that's what it meant.
That's what we're talking about. There's 26 groundwater, yeah, we should have spelled that out on the board, but that's what it is, it's groundwater.
I mean, considering, you know, it's going behind all the sampling, that's what I thought.
Well, as far as the groundwater wells, the exceedances of 1,4-dioxane in all the testing have been very high, and they haven't gone down anything.
Yeah, we've been, for 1,4-dioxane, we've only been sampling since 2015. I mean, this last sampling round, they were a little bit lower, but that doesn't mean it might be a little bit higher next sampling round.
Exactly.
You can't make a determination based upon one sampling
They're
round.
very high.
But they are high particularly in the Peters Mine air shaft. And that's why when the feasibility study was directed, when the feasibility study was developed, there was basically direction that we want to look at alternatives specifically for the air shaft and not just the groundwater.
I mean, I have here in one of the wells, 11D, which is like 262 feet deep. In 2017, it was 6.3, the level of dioxane.
11D, that would be wells immediately adjacent to the air shaft.
Yeah. So, you know.
So that's, I mean, and you would
very
expect
high
those
there.
would be the next highest. And that's what we kind of see. We see the air shaft is highest, the 11 cluster is usually the next highest levels. And then, you know, as you move further, it dilutes out and.
What's an acceptable level?
Well, here,
0.4.
0.
the groundwater quality standard established by the New Jersey, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection is 0.4 parts per billion.
I mean, where is ground?
And what is it, like, isn't there like a different standard for different states?
Yes.
Well, there's probably different standards in
And
different
federal.
states. But there's also the issue, and there's also, and I think we've discussed it before, the standard, like, surface, we've got surface water standards versus groundwater standards. That's a groundwater standard. I don't think there is a surface water standard in the state of New Jersey, but when it's looked at in other states, generally, the surface water standards, if it
0.04?
0.4
ppm.
So 0.4 parts per billion is the groundwater quality standard. But surface water standards tend to be, in other states tend to be quite a bit
Are
higher.
we seeing any infections of that? Less than that?
Are we seeing?
Any detections less than 0.4?
Yes, yes. I mean, we do see levels below 0.4.
How far from the air shaft?
Pretty, I get, basically, what we generally see, if we're looking at surface water, you see it drop down to the 0.4 level by the time you get to Sally's Pond. When we sample downgrading Sally's Pond. No, it's a little more than that. It's not miles, but the Sally's Pond might be a quarter to a half a mile from the site. So at that point,
So
you
it's
see.
from dilution through the ground?
Well, there could be other processes working, but we believe dilution is probably the biggest.
That's in one single direction, so what about in the other direction?
Well, I mean, basically, as far as the groundwater, again, the groundwater, trees like flows towards the Park Brook, sort of rolling down into the valley that way.
Okay.
So that's where the groundwater plume is essentially.
So it's flowing sort of southeast?
Sort of, yes. It basically, as you expect, it's flowing from the high rivers to the low rivers to the valleys to the surface water bodies in those.
Can I ask one question about what your presentation has been on? I just have one question regarding your overall approach to looking at this. How do you account for the fact that these mines were like active blast mines where you're going to have so much fracture at so many different depths, and you have to try to model where this is going to potentially go both now and in the future? How do you account for that in your development of these facts that people are going to use to make decisions, especially with
So your concern is that the blasting is going to create any fractures? Well, usually when you get fractures like that from blasting, it's very localized fractures.
how many years ago did they use those mines? Hundreds of years ago, maybe.
Sure, yeah. I mean, they were in operation, they started the surface back in the 1700s in the Deep Mine area. But, again, we have an extensive monitoring well network. We're going to be adding additional wells as part of any remedy. There'll be additional sentinel wells added to ensure that we understand where the contamination is.
So Joe, I need you to wrap up.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to cite a historic document from the EPA real quick though, because you raised a very good point inquiring about the levels of contaminants and the parts per billion. I'm looking at a pollution report that you helped me find. It's pollution report number 8 from Andrew Caforti in 2012. This was September of 2012. Soil samples collected from 11 residential properties by NJDEP contain concentrations of lead in at least one quadrant greater than 400 parts per billion.
That's about
I know, I'm just saying that. The results in surface soil sampled from 0 to 6 inches range from 22 parts per billion to 10,000 parts per billion. These levels just all over the place. It's insane. It's insane.
But that's nothing to do with my question, really.
It's just building onto your point. That's all.
Okay, so I need to go through the last slides here. Okay, go ahead.
Sure, and then the last concern was additional surface water sampling should be conducted on an ongoing basis, and the short answer is, yeah, we agree. And it will be a part of any remedy that we do select. There will be ongoing surface water sampling. We wanted to point out that we've had this sampling surface water, we're going to continue to sample surface water, that 9 locations were added based upon comments provided in the Jacobs report, the one that was released back in 2017. There was additional groundwater modeling conducted based upon the recommendations in the Jacobs report also. And again, just pointing out that 1,4-dioxane is not detected, has not been detected at any point down gradient or downstream of Sally's Pond.
So there is a question. Do you want to, please ask your question before you go. I know that this meeting has gone over, but we do have opportunity for public comment. And we would really appreciate it if you want to ask your comment, please do. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, are there other questions about the comments from North
Jersey District Board of
Thank you. Or the responses to them? Anyone? Now, try to move quickly forward. I'm going to put the sign-in sheet at the back. Is there anybody who hasn't signed the sign-in sheet? Okay. In terms of timeline, so Joe, we've got, right now, it's 60 days for OU2, correct? Let's talk about the OU3 timeframe. So the feasibility study, where do things stand? What's going to happen next?
Sure, I mean, as far as the feasibility study, I mean, at this point, we will have to either revise or approve the feasibility study. At that point, a draft, a proposed plan will be released shortly after. That proposed plan will lay out, will summarize the remedial investigation work, the risk assessment proposed, clean up alternatives, or alternatives for groundwater and the Peters Mine Pit air shaft. That will trigger a public comment period. Typically it's 30 days, likely to be 60 days here, but our last public comment period was extended out to 120 days. So
let me just ask, so what's your sense of when the feasibility study might be finalized?
My sense in terms of approval of the feasibility study is likely to be sometime in June. And proposed plan, maybe late June, early July.
Do you think that there will be a public meeting associated with that, or?
Once the proposed plan is released to public, there would be an EPA public meeting during the public comment period, during which we'll accept verbal comments and we'll accept written comments during the public comment period. Once that public comment period is over, EPA then prepares a responsive summary responding to those comments, and also the drafts a record decision, and then we would release the record decision, which includes that responsive summary, and that would basically formalize selection of a revenue for groundwater.
So that's maybe the fall, later?
If we're looking at it, assuming early July, I mean, two months, September for the public comment period, so we're looking at like October, maybe the earliest for a record of decision.
October, later, maybe end of year,
Yes.
maybe into next year?
Depending upon how the public comment period goes, it's how sensitive the comments are.
Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, could you tell me where well number 3D is?
Anybody know?
That's right near SR3. It's at the northern part of SR3.
And that is?
Right, it's near the seep, and there's actually, I think there's 3 wells in part of the cluster.
And how, is that close to the shaft?
It is, do you know where, as you walk towards the Peters Mine Pit area, you go down Hope Mountain Road? It's right there near Hope Mountain Road.
So, okay, so just a reminder that with OU3, the feasibility study, maybe having this approved or by end of June, the remedial action plan, a draft, perhaps a public meeting in July. And this is one of the few times when you do not preview the draft document with the CAG, is that right?
That's correct. We do not release a draft proposed plan. We just release the proposed plan, everyone gets it at the same time.
So often the CAG gets a working version before anybody else sees it, but the requirement is that it comes out all at once. It is draft and there will be opportunities for input at that time. And so that's looking July, record of decision into the fall. That's for the groundwater. So OU2, which is the surface, is the soils. Right now, the remedial consent decree has been lodged. Assume the 60-day public comment period. So let's look at calendars. What would the CAG like to schedule in terms of a dedicated working session for the consent decree?
You guys want to talk about it offline? Like online rather, I guess.
We have to do it right away, so.
And Vivian, we're talking about a working session for discussing the consent decree. So that would be within the next couple of weeks or
You can let me know please if they set a date or something.
I didn't have it here. Is it gonna be?
I would have to ask, but probably, yeah.
Okay.
On the Thursday,
Well-
the 23rd?
I'll take my helicopter.
23rd of May.
May.
So here's the question is,
Good night, everybody.
so I would not be part of that. There would be a CAG working session.
Oh, okay.
And so I think you would have to coordinate with Joe to see when he's available, because I think it would be more or less of a Q&A session,
Right,
working session.
This is not,
okay, well, I guess.
You know what, we can talk about this. We can talk
Yeah,
about
did I
this
know,
offline.
yeah?
I would have to look at my.
So we'll do it, we'll just email each other.
Yeah, we'll talk about this offline.
Okay.
We have lots to do.
And with that,
I make a motion that close the meeting. I'm gonna make a motion, you'll be standing by yourself.
we don't do motions to open or close. Okay, if